Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much for joining us this evening for our look into Google Analytics, Google Analyze This. My name's John Folds. I'm the Head of Acquisition Marketing for Moonfruit.com since last September. And before then, I spent 4 years as the Chief Data Analyst for the dating website eharmony.co.uk. So kind of that's where I'm from. This presentation is hopefully a little bit different to anything you've ever seen before on Google Analytics. I'm really hoping it is anyway. So it's at its highest level, it is kind of how to use Google Analytics, but not so much in the strictly technical sense, in the sense of anyone could go to Google Analytics and look at the help topics, for example. What I really want to kind of get out of this is I want this to be how you look at Google Analytics, how to take specific things out of it and how to actually make those practical, how to apply those to your website, and how potentially to take those learnings and apply them to a wider business. So just before I get going, just kind of just so I can get the starting point right, can I just have a quick kind of show of hands? Who here kind of currently runs or maintains their own websites? Okay, fair few people. And how many people kind of have ever actually dug into Google Analytics in the past? All right, cool, fair few people. All right, lovely. That's about right, lovely. So obviously, as a starting point, what I kind of want to say is I think it's unsurprising that like a lot of people will look at Google Analytics and they'll think of it as a solution. What you're looking for primarily when you log into Analytics is you're looking for an answer to a problem, because no one ever starts a business specifically thinking, I can't wait to dig into the Analytics suite backend. Oh yes. Well, I do actually, because I'm a data analyst, so personally I do. Very few other people do though. And that's because obviously businesses start with products, they start with services, and you only ever really turn to your analytics when you have a specific question about your product or your service. How many X have I sold? How much am I able to sell Y for? How much money have I made on product Z? Questions like that. What I really want to do with this presentation is I really want to change that way of thinking, and I really want to hopefully open a few eyes to the possibilities that analytics and Google Analytics specifically, because it's a remarkably powerful and flexible suite of tools, can actually give you. So I want Google Analytics for you to be not an answer, but an ongoing learning exercise to tell you who are your customers, where have they come from, and more specifically, what do they love, what do they hate, and how can you change things to actually better improve things for them. So I'm going to start off with primarily the audience tab itself. This is like the main report that pretty much everyone knows in Google Analytics. If you've ever logged into Google Analytics, you default onto the audience tab. It's the one that literally tells you what your visits look like. That's the one everyone knows, and at its core, that's what people think analytics basically is. It's how many visitors do you have on your website. There's a lot more interesting things you can do with it though, and I think particularly the way that you choose to cut the data is specifically important in this particular question. Day of week and hour of day are going to be the two that I specifically think are very, very important, because this is a start of a process. I think it's very, very important in understanding, having a picture in your mind of who your actual customers are, because a customer ultimately is not just someone who has given you money X for experience or product Y. That's a person who's gone through some sort of journey. That's a person who has some sort of profile to them, and that's the sort of person who, if you can understand who they are, you can find out who more of those people are, where more of those people are, and acquire more of them. So what I want to do really is start off with the view of how to do a few sanity checks. So first up, just split your data over the last few days, take it for the last few days and look at it in terms of time of day that people are coming to your site, and day of week in terms of that people are coming to your service, and start coming up with a very high level profile of who your users are. Some of you may already know this, but for those of you who've never done this, it's a useful exercise. So for example, specifically when it comes to time of day, who are your customers and where are they likely to be logging in for? If you're seeing primarily a spike during the working day, obviously you're dealing with a lot of businesses and you're dealing with people who are probably at work and looking at your product for business needs. If you're seeing during the day but you're seeing a spike around lunchtime, you're dealing with people who are at work, but you're probably dealing with people who are on their lunch break. So they're at work and they are commuters, employed, etc., but they're doing it for personal reasons. If you're seeing not so much during the day but during the evening, you're dealing with personal reasons. At the weekend, you're probably dealing, of course, again with personal reasons. Late at night is a fascinating one, because potentially, and afternoons also, I think later in the day is a fascinating area. If you're about 4 p.m, you're potentially dealing with procrastinators, people who are very, very tired of their day and just want to go home and are looking for something to entertain them, potentially other than cats, for the next 2 hours before they actually get to go home. And potentially if you're getting into the evening, and as I say, I come from 4 years of dating industry, so I'm very, very well aware, there can be a very good spike just after the pubs have closed and people get home drunk. That can be a very interesting view for people actually logging onto a service. So in short, kind of start using that to actually start getting a view as to who your customers are and what that tells you about your customers. In more practical terms, there's another very important question to ask yourself, which is, if users are interested in coming to your site at a particular time, that doesn't just mean they want to come to your site, that means they're interested in your service in general. Basically, most users and customers are going to be completely platform agnostic. They don't care whether they're coming to your website or in any other way. Plenty of people don't necessarily, are still going to be interested in you at the same time, but don't necessarily aren't going to come to your website. So for that reason, ask yourself, if you've got evening or weekend people, if you have a shop or a phone line, are your opening hours correct? Have you got if you're seeing, you know, a spike of interest at about 7 p.m. on your website, are there people who might actually prefer to phone you? Do you have a phone line open at that point? It's just a very good practical question. It's a useful sanity check just to start off with at the very kind of highest level. Another report that exists within the audience tab is, of course, your demographics report. This has actually been this has been expanded upon by Google relatively recently, and it's getting a bit more interesting and powerful now. Now they're piping a lot of data that they've got from people logged in as Google accounts to start giving you a profile as to who exactly is doing what, and start what they're calling interest categories in Google, starting to giving you a picture. So again, same question: are your customers actually who they actually think they are? And I think the more important question that we actually get to is, this is where we get to start talking about imagery that's on your website. Because I'm going to, as I say, dating background, I'm going to go over to the next slide now, and basically I'm going to show you 3 images that come off 3 different dating websites. Now, at a glance, I'm pretty sure if I now pretty much took that straight back down again, I think all of you would know if you had to choose a dating site to go for, you probably pretty much at that glance you'd know which one you were going to sign up with if it was just one of those 3. At a glance, you know immediately, because people generally make decisions incredibly quickly. People like to think they're kind of incredibly savvy and make their decisions in a very rational, deep way. People generally make kind of snap decisions as to what they see. Imagery is one of the big ones. There will be a vast number of your customers who will come in and you'll have about maybe 4 seconds to sway them. The image they see, whether they think it is somebody like them or someone that they aspire to be, or in that case, someone they aspire to be with, makes all the difference. And that kind of leads to a question that sometimes it can be very hard to ask yourself, but it's a very important one to confront sooner or later, which is, have you built a site that you personally would choose to use, or based on your understanding of who your users are, what age they are, their demographics, have you built a site that you think works best for who your largest group is? Because even though a site not necessarily be what you would prefer, potentially, if you know that your demographics don't meet up to you personally, it might well be worth thinking about going something that you personally would not choose, but test something that you think could work for them. The next thing we're going to go into is locations. This is another one that kind of, I've come across this a lot of times in the past actually. When people are from an offline background, if they've started from a shop and they see their website as a logical extension of an offline business, there is often a very casual assumption that pretty much all your traffic is going to be from the UK. If your shop's in the UK, you expect all your traffic to come from that town, or from, if you're lucky, the wider county area in general. People assume the same thing's going to be true of a website, and it generally isn't. People are very often surprised by where their traffic's coming from. So more of your users may be international than you think. That, however, the bigger question is, where is the opportunities in that regard? Because as you can see there, we've got kind of quite a good list of nationalities there, and potentially we might be thinking, okay, so do we need a localized site, or do we need a translation into the various Indian languages, for example, or into French? And this is where another report comes in very useful, again within the audience tab, and that's your browser language, which Google Analytics gives you visibility of, because that's actually a much better predicator of whether you need a translation or a local website, because otherwise you can't really tell the difference between expats or people who are perfectly happy using your site in its current language. So if I actually bring up that at the same time, you'll see obviously you'll see that American English, which is often what a lot of UK machines are set to, and British English are predominant, as well as English unspecified. But you'll notice very interestingly that no variations of any Indian language pop up in the top 10 at all. Well, in the top 8 there, but actually no Indian language actually popped up in this list until about number 40 or so, meaning that if we had invested the time and the effort creating a translation or a local site, that might well in some ways have been a bit of wasted effort in that regard. Meanwhile, though Spain doesn't show up, or any Spanish-speaking South American countries in the top 8 list, quite a few browsers set to Spanish and Spanish variations, that's 6 and 8, do actually show up in that list. So potentially, if we were looking for a next logical step, a Spanish local site could actually be a good opportunity. So browser language is a really good way of spotting where there are potential new growth opportunities internationally, much better than the location report to my mind. So we've just touched upon kind of the importance of first impressions with the imagery that I showed you, that we were touching on dating sites earlier. And as the old kind of expression goes, obviously you do only get one chance to first impression. And in many ways, in websites, that's much more important than on an actual first date. First dates, generally, you've got at least an hour before the person excuses themselves to go to the bathroom and then runs out of the restaurant, leaves you there. I know from experience. Whereas on websites, you have, as I say, it's about 4 seconds. And I'll get into the exact metrics that you will actually see later in this presentation. But the most important filter that you can put over any report in Google Analytics, and the nice thing is this is available on pretty much any report in the entire analytical suite, is when you get into new users. So you can pretty much do anything down to new users. So in this case, I'm in the behavioral tab and I'm into the new versus returning users report, and I'm just looking at new users. A new user, of course, being defined as someone who has not come to your site before. There's some flexibility because technically if someone comes, then goes away for a long enough period of time, their cookie will expire and the system will think they're a new user again. But for the sake of argument, let us say that a new user has never seen your service in the past. This is a remarkably useful set of metrics to look at, because basically what it tells you is if someone knows, let us assume, almost nothing about you, how do they respond to the service in general? You want to look at this over just your general traffic bounce rates and pages per visit, for example, but it gives you the clearest picture of how someone who isn't already loyal to you. Because if you've got 60% returning users and 40% new users, those 60% of remarkably loyal users might be skewing your figures and making them look very good. But if the 40% who've only just come in are actually having a really bad time for whatever reason, then your business is going to struggle to grow, but you're not going to see it because you can't filter to it. So that's what this is primarily actually going to be about. So there's 3 main metrics that you're going to want to be looking at, and varies massively site to site, but with a pinch of salt, I'm just going to give you some pointers for what you hopefully would like to be seeing. So the first is bounce rate, very important. A bounce being defined incidentally as, my understanding in the most recent iteration, Google is now choosing to define a bounce as either someone leaves your site without doing something or someone leaves your site within 10 seconds, whichever of those events occurs first. A bounce rate generally for a new user, it's pretty much considered that 50% is a good result. I've seen sites that consider themselves doing very well on 65% bounce rate. Particularly if you're a niche project, do kind of compensate for that. If you are offering particularly a low conversion but very high price product, never expect to get that. You'll always get much higher results than that. But in general, I think 50% is a really nice thing to aspire to. For pages per visit, for most sites, I think you'd be looking for a new user about 3 pages per visit. If you are a content site, if you're maintaining a blog, if you're any form of syndicating or sharing content, or you are very strong in social spaces, that's where you're getting your traffic from, and you're looking to get shares, look for 6. I'd say you're looking for 6 pages per visit in that regard. And the final one is average visit duration. Again, massively varies. So for example, if you are a video heavy site and your main function is to make a new user come and watch your video to educate them, then this is going to get skewed massively. But generally, 120 seconds is not a bad thing to start off doing. So basically this tells you about averages, and as is going to be kind of a theme for this presentation, I want to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, like kind of Google Analytics inception. So there's actually 2 users buried inside these averages. And the user engagement report, which is a brilliant report incidentally, helps break those down, because then you can start bucketing people into how long they've been on your site and how far they got into your site, how many pages they viewed. And you can actually see that bucketed into segments. And again, you can filter that down to new users. And there's 2 distinct classes of users in here that I do think it's very important to treat as separate users, because again, the average partly hides that. Just in the same way that if you merge your new and returnings together, you don't get a true picture. If you merge all your news together, you don't get a true picture either. Your first user are basically your incredibly low qualification users. These are your users who are on your site for less than 10 seconds and on your site and they only see 1 page. They're coming in, they're here for about 4 seconds, and they leave again. And pretty much no matter how good a job you do, that's in almost 100% of cases going to be the single largest group of users that come onto your site. The second group that you've got are your high qualification users. This is basically where you're getting your customers from right now. Your users who are coming in, and they're coming in for maybe, in this case, 4 minutes, and 4 pages. This is a really unscientific approach, incidentally. This is just kind of good for at a glance, but generally, look at this graph. Wherever you see a bump below the first, so kind of here and here in my case, yours may vary, obviously. That's pretty much where you draw a line. You say, okay, so I have a rough idea of who my low qualification users are and who my high qualification users are. So in this case, I just want you to kind of go away, and I think this is a really, really interesting thing to do. Actually walk through those journeys. If you have like any friends or family members, hopefully not family members, because hopefully your family members know what you do, but any friends who kind of happen to have not visited a website you maintain, literally get them to go through these journeys. Just say to them, go to my website, you've got 4 seconds, and then try and figure out what they actually know. What did they learn? Do they know what your website did? Ask them who they thought the website was for. Would they be interested in coming back? Do they have any interest in actually reading further, or have they just thought, okay, I think I more or less understand it? Because that can be a very useful process. The second is, get someone else, again, hopefully with no prior knowledge of your service, to go through, they're allowed to read for, in this case, 4 minutes and no more than 4 pages, whichever of those things happens to come first. Then start asking them about what they understand about your service. Their knowledge should obviously be much more in depth, but what you want to get into with them is, if you have a particular USP that you're particularly proud of, one thing that you think puts you ahead of your competition, have they got that? If price is your thing, do they understand that you're cheaper than your competition? If your thing is quality, do they understand that you are quality? They might well easily come away from 4 minutes and 4 pages understanding that you sell novelty dinosaur toys, for example, but do they understand what the unique thing that actually makes you worth buying them from above anyone else happens to be? Very important question to go through, and well worth getting someone who to kind of go through and walk through this journey to find out what they think. So let us assume, for the sake of argument, that what you find when you do these little exercises when you go home is you're not necessarily 100% happy with what you see. And that's fair enough, because nothing's ever perfect and we always want to try and improve. So let's dig a little bit further into diagnosing what the problem is, because there's basically 2 ways that this can go. You've got 2 things that can happen. The first thing that you've got is, are you acquiring the wrong people? You know, are you basically getting people who just aren't appropriate? Are you buying people of the wrong age or the wrong demographic in some capacity? So wherever you put them on, when they come onto your service, they're never going to convert because they're just not right for you. If you have a really high-end product, are you getting in students, for example? On the other side, are potentially you getting completely the right, perfect people for your product? Brilliant match, but you're putting them onto the wrong page. You're not showing them the right thing. Either your homepage just isn't right in some way, it's not well optimized, or you're putting them onto the wrong landing page, the wrong product, for example. And there's 2 reports that are really useful for trying to diagnose what that problem is. Again, this is kind of finger in the air, but it can be a really useful indicator just at a glance. So the first report is in the acquisition tab, and it's the all traffic report. This basically wraps up where you're getting your traffic from into particular buckets. So if you're unfamiliar with some of these terms, basically Google organic means they've come off Google, but they didn't click on the paid ads at the top. They clicked on one of the organic results underneath, the natural results. Direct means, generally we understand it to mean they actually typed your site into the URL bar directly, though it also means no tracking was available. Google CPC or PPC is obviously paid ads that exist within Google. Double click is that we understand that to mean basically display advertising, so we've been running banner ads around the internet. And Bing organic, again, SEO, but on Bing rather than Google. So in this case, just have a look over these results, have a glance over them and try and see, does anything stand out to you? Because generally, if everything's ship-shape, then everything ought to be broadly level. Everything should be broadly matching up with your kind of site average. So your average overall pages is about 40% in this case. So okay, 38, 35, 35. So potentially, if we were saying, okay, where's our problem in terms of traffic that's coming in that's not right for us, 75% of our display traffic is bouncing. In some ways, I want to caveat that because some traffic naturally has different levels of qualification to it. If you get traffic off display, it's cheap traffic, but it's always going to be slightly lower quality, whereas if you're buying from, say, affiliate networks or other kind of incentivized promotions like that, it's going to be small volumes, quite expensive traffic, but it's going to convert well. So pinch of salt, but at a glance, I think kind of you can see immediately, you can spot where there may potentially be an issue there and something you may want to investigate, whether you want to continue getting traffic from that source or look for traffic elsewhere. The other question is whether you want to be looking at whether the problem is on your site rather than the external traffic. In that case, the behavior landing page report is brilliant. This is basically a summary of all the pages that a user can land on, and again, you can filter this to new users, and you can see the bounce rate, pages per visit, and average view duration per page. Pretty much exactly the same process. Look over it, try and figure out at a glance, is there one page that's clearly performing better or worse than another? So again, there's a couple of different things there going on there. And even if you don't actually find an immediate problem, it's really useful food for thought because it can tell you things. So for example, in this case, slash, by the way, will always mean your home page because this basically means what goes after your basic site domain. So just a basic slash means your home page. Whereas sign up for us is actually a home page that's actually a landing page that's very similar to our home page. There's only a couple of small variations there, but there's actually a bit of a significant difference between the two bounce rates, pages per visit and average view duration. So logically what we might ask ourselves is, okay, so what can we learn from this page that we could apply to this page? Or rather, should what's on this page actually be this page? If there's one page that's working really well for you, consider promoting that page, send more traffic there, take something off that page and put it on your main home page. It's worth having a think about. Now, I'm not saying, incidentally, this is going to be mutually exclusive. You're going to end up with situations where there's going to be a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. That's kind of inevitable. But again, it can be a really useful way of just seeing if you can diagnose a problem. And incidentally, because obviously Google Analytics is a Google product, you can dig into the Google properties further. So if you literally just click on Google Organic, less so because Google hides a lot of natural search traffic results from you these days. But Google CPC, if you're buying paid ads from Google, either through the Google Display Network, i.e. DoubleClick, or Google CPC or PPC, you can literally see this information at the keyword level, so you can see whether certain keywords are performing better or worse for you. If you're e-commerce and thus you've got keywords looking after specific products, that can be very, very useful because it can tell you if a particular keyword that you're paying money for is performing badly for you. Obviously, again, I wouldn't do that for more than, say, your top 10 terms, for example, because the volumes get too small. It's very hard to get a clear read of what's actually going on in that regard. So let's talk about good and bad journeys, because of course, right now what we've really been talking about is user starts to X and goes to Y, and with Y, a good move or a bad move. And generally, users don't really think of pages. And generally, if you ask a user, or anyone who's used a website, when you're on that website you just visited right now, how many pages did you visit? Users don't know. They never know, because as far as people are aware these days, particularly more and more people being completely web native, they just click around and they don't think of, oh, I'm on one page, I'm going to click through to this next page and then I'm going to click back to the other page. To them, they were just on a website. It was just one experience. They might have an understanding they were on the page for about 2 minutes, but they have no clue how many pages they were on in that 2-minute period. So in that case, you've got to start thinking about what an actual journey looks like to a user. Because if you can steer them around your site particular ways, so actually kind of encouraging them through links being in the right place, through call to actions, through particular things being more prominent than others, you can actually potentially get much better results overall. But you can't just do it in terms of traffic sources or the landing page. It goes deeper than that, because a user will, as we saw earlier, generally a user who's going to be your customer is going to visit 4 pages, for example, before they actually decide to actually commit and end their first journey, having actually had a pretty positive experience. And this is what the behavior flow report is for. Again, this can be found in behavior flow. What you really want to do is go to this report, filter it to new users like we've been doing pretty much throughout all these reports, and then go and then just click on your home page. So again, just slash. This will then tell you for any given period how many visits. In this case, it's just page views, so it's a little unscientific. But again, this is just a trending tool. Always use Google Analytics just as a trending tool. It's pixel data, so it's always going to be, there's a slight variance for error. So let us say, for the sake of argument, there's a certain number of page views in a particular period of time. And then it will tell you next, excluding those people who dropped off, which is this red bar right here, where they chose to go to next, which pages they happen to end up in. The nice thing about this is it then tells you, of the new users who started on the homepage and then went somewhere else, what proportion of those users then subsequently dropped out. Now that can be very, very useful, because that can tell you where logically should I be trying to push people next. You can get really far down the rabbit hole, by the way, doing this report. I thoroughly recommend taking this report with a pinch of salt, because you can very easily overthink what is the optimal user journey. But in theory, if you can see, and especially if you're e-commerce, for example, if you're e-commerce and you have, say, 4 products that you kind of have on a little carousel on your homepage, if you can see of those 4 products, one of them only has a 10% drop-off, but one of them has a 50% drop-off. Logically, you have a product that you potentially want to have more new users going to. Whereas if you've got returning users coming into some form of returning user page or a login page or some form of internal logged in environment, you want product B potentially, which works less well for new users, but might still be a good seller overall, offered to them. So potentially that's kind of a way of looking at that. So you can see the drop-off rate per second page. And this can kind of indicate a couple of things. It can indicate either that the content may be wrong. So for example, a page such as this. In this particular case, this is an interesting one because you can basically come to two conclusions from a page that's not getting much traffic having a high drop-off. You can say the content is wrong or the architecture was wrong. Either something was wrong on this page's content that made people leave immediately, or something was wrong in the architecture that meant we shouldn't have really allowed people to go from here to here, because really we would have rather had them go, say, from here to here, because this looks like it had a much better drop-off rate. And generally, there's been a lot of work done by kind of a lot of marketing and online organisations that basically say, the longer you can keep someone on your site, the more likely they are to subsequently stay. It's the same principle where if you can get someone to fill out the first field of a form, they're much more likely to complete the next 5 fields of a form. Again, in my previous life when I was working in dating, Match.com do a wonderful job of this. The reg form that exists on their homepage, when you first get there, you see only 2 fields. It just says, I'm a man looking for a woman, you select what gender you are and what you're looking for, and you enter an email address. And you think that's all you need. You click continue, and the rest of the form folds out. And at that point, they ask you for your postcode, they ask you for all sorts of other details, they ask you to set a password. But I was actually able to speak to one of the people who was behind this test, and they basically said that they were looking at something in the range of 20% increase in form completion rates, because they managed to get people to fill out a much shorter form, and once people are committed to filling out the short form, they were much more likely to fill out the long form. Same basic principle applies here. You want to get people as deep into your site as possible along the best journey that we believe will lead to the lowest number of drop-offs. In this case, this is a bit of an interesting one. This is kind of obviously another example of why you should sense check. /pricing is obviously a page where your pricing is. You're always going to have a level of drop-off on your pricing page because there's always going to be a group of people who want to pay less than what your proposition costs, unless your pricing page literally is a flashing banner saying it's completely free and always will be. So generally that will not be the case for most sustainable, profitable businesses. So pricing will always have a little bit of a higher than typical drop-off. Apply sense checks to some of this information. So obviously, again, we've been now talking about journeys, and journeys is the right thing to talk about. But the thing is, I'm sure kind of many of you will be thinking, well, that's fine for that journey, but my website doesn't look anything like that. No one goes from my homepage to my pricing page. Fair enough. All of you have your own unique websites. Every website will be incredibly unique. Luckily, Google Analytics is set up to actually allow for remarkable personalization of journeys. And this is basically done through the goals. Goals are custom conversion events. Basically, you can go into the goals section of Google Analytics and you quite simply tell it, when something happens, count that a goal has happened. People will generally use this just to keep a track of sales. They will literally say nothing more than, if product X has been bought, then give me a goal X. And they will use it to track, like over a certain number of days, how many product X's are sold on that day. And for most people, they will never do anything more with goals, which is the greatest travesty of this, because goals are wonderful. I actually love goals. I would marry goals if I could. Because goals have remarkable flexibility, and Google keeps adding more and more things that are allowed to be goals. You can set so many events on your site as a goal. So kind of as a starting point, if, for example, you consider that events on your site that are not sales have value. That's inevitable. If, for example, you try and get someone's email address so that you can send them a newsletter, if you can be in someone's inbox, say, once a week for the next however long you're going to send them email before you stop doing so, that has value to you, because someone whose inbox you can access through email is very likely to subsequently go on to convert. If you are a content site, someone who clicks a share button to take a piece of content you've written and share it, that has value to you. You might choose to assume that has a level of value to you. If, for example, you have a lot of rich media on your site, if someone watches a video you've put up and actually makes the commitment to open a video and watch it for a certain length of time, that has value to you. All of these things can be set as goals. But the real wonderful thing is events. When we start getting into events, because events have even more flexibility. Events are things you can set in Google Analytics that basically mean when something happens, it tracks it as an event. You're probably thinking at this point, what is the difference between an event and a goal? There's no difference between an event and a goal. They used to be different. Google changed it so they weren't different anymore, and unfortunately they kind of kept them as separate events because Google sometimes acts irrationally. But events, interestingly, are pretty much what you want to be using, because events can do pretty much literally anything. There's a little bit of coding involved here, and I know I haven't really been going into setup at all And don't worry, I'm not about to start, because there's so many really good little guides you can sit down with, where the easiest way to set up any of this is to just go into Google Analytics and try and set it up with a guide, step-by-step guide next to you. Way easier than me trying to talk you through it and you trying to remember how to do it in however many days' time you actually come to doing this, I promise. But pretty much anything can be a trackable event. I'm going to walk you through a journey now that theoretically could exist on any e-commerce site, with all the different things that can be set as an event that can actually be firing, that can actually fire as a trigger. So let us say, for the sake of argument, a user visits a particular page. Let's call it a new. Let's say you have a new product. Let's say you have a new product you're launching. A user visits the page on which the product sits. A user stays on that page for X seconds, where you can define X. It looks like they've actually read some of the copy you've put on that page. A user clicks on purchase on that page. A user clicks on the basket to go and look at their basket. A user then clicks checkout to go to checkout. You then interrupt them with a reg form, because they have to register in order to purchase. Plenty of even the biggest e-commerce sites will do that, no shame in it. So the user then completes the first field in the reg form, so they enter something in it. The user completes the second reg form in the second field in the reg form. A user submits a completed reg form, and the user then is sent to the delivery, and they confirm the delivery details. A user then is sent to the payment flow, and they enter their payment details. And a user then clicks pay, and the purchase is thereafter complete when they reach the payment confirmation screen. And the nice thing about that is, not only can you track every single one of those as independent events, that's a little bit too much data. There's a really lovely thing, which is, it's called the funnel visualization. It exists within goals, and basically it's a way that you can say, goals are likely to happen in a certain order, so you can literally set them into a funnel, where you can say, okay, for a particular event, how many of these occur? Okay, of the people who did that, how many made it onto the next step, and the next step, and the next step, and the next step? And you can literally do, I think it's 20 is your limit. I think Google right now sets a limit of 20 goals in a funnel. So you can basically see, obviously, through this kind of the green bar, i.e. people who made it through, and red bar, i.e. people who didn't, where your pain points are. And that's remarkably useful, because it gives you incredible flexibility and lets you diagnose problems very, very easily. So let's look at some possible issues if you were seeing the red going a little bit OTT on any of these individual stages. So a user is not staying on page for more than a few seconds. Check your traffic quality. Where's it coming from? Go back to the report we were looking at earlier for where your traffic's coming from, which again you can filter down to this specific page. The user is not clicking purchase. Pricing. Could pricing be your problem? The user has got to the reg form but has not actually completed it. They may have completed the first box but not the second. So in that case, if they just abandon the reg form the moment they see it, is it too long? Or in one other case, are you actually asking for something that's a little bit too early in the relationship? For example, you demanding a phone number? Are you demanding they set a password and an email? Really much too early. A lot of e-commerce sites these days are scrapping that. They're letting you say continue as a guest, and you can choose to set up an account later. I think John Lewis was one of the first to do that, and they saw some really good improvements over the top of that. User confirming delivery details. Delivery cost is a big one here. Also, international delivery. Again, location report we looked at earlier. If you're seeing people drop off at your delivery phase, have you got more international people buying this than you think you do? If so, are you delivering internationally, and are your international prices a little bit OTT? Worth looking into. Payment details. Payment options. Are you offering all credit cards, all debit cards, PayPal, Amazon payments? So many things are actually quite easy to get plugins for now. Amazon payments is a brilliant one, actually. Sites that have taken that up have seen some really good results on that. So easy to implement too. So potentially there's no harm in adding some more payment options if users are dropping out there, because here you probably know it's not a pricing issue, because if they've been through purchase, basket and checkout, then they knew what it would cost. No one gets through 3 times confirming when the price is on screen without knowing what the price is. So potentially your payment option is actually a problem there. So basically what I want to kind of conclude with overall is going back to where I started, which is what I want to say, that analytics, I hope I've shown you, is not an answer to a specific question really. Analytics should be a constant learning process. Always go deeper down the rabbit hole. Look into all of your products, look into your locations, look into your audience. Figure out who they are, where they're coming from, where they're going, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what they love and what they hate. Pretty much through Google Analytics, you can spot at any point in their journey, whether they've just come to you, whether they're looking at something, whether they're a returning user, whether they're actually at the purchase of buying something, where they're dropping off, and start from that to come up with working theories for who these people are and why that happened. Overall, just stop treating analytics as an answer to a single question, such as how many eggs have been bought, and instead start treating it as the source of endless, very worthwhile questions that are very worth exploring. Thank you very much.
My name's Luca. I'm a photographer. I have my own business called Luca Photography, which is very original. It all started when I was 16. Photography was just a hobby then, and then it developed into something that was always a passion.